Hi, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Grounded, the Regenerative Farming Podcast. We're doing another live one tonight, where we're going to be talking all things tools for transformation. So we're going to try and talk about all sorts of machinery, equipment, perspectives of time that might be interesting when we are looking at what might help us when we're moving towards more regenerative stuff. So hopefully we'll have a good discussion here as we go on. Kyle, how are you? Nice to see you.
Yeah, doing well. I thought you forgot about me for a sec. I was a little offended, but
I was gonna, but I thought we'd better get you roped in at some point. So
I'm good, man. How are you? How are things?
good, yeah. Everything's good. The cows are still outside and they're not making too much mess. So if that's the case, life's good. So nice
Very
and
good.
easy, please, Kyle. So
Very good.
what's happening down south?
Well, I was at the British Cattle Breeders Conference this week. It was really good. Sometimes I feel like I'm in this regenerative bubble, so it was good to expand a little bit and hear some of the more conventional talking points to keep me a little more grounded. So that was good. Yeah, it was a good time, but I'm really excited for this topic. It's one of those unsexy topics that don't make the top of most people's lists or the groundswell, talks, but it's probably one of the most important di discussions, that we can have is how to actually implement regenerative practices and the type of kit that it requires. So I'm excited to talk to our guest today, and also for those watching, if you have any questions, please enter those into the chat, and then we'll try to weave those into the conversation as well. So if anybody has any specific questions, please enter them in, and we'll be happy to answer them. So, Stu, if you have unless you have anything else, should we start introducing our guests?
Absolutely, Kyle. Yeah, let's go straight in.
All right. So on my screen, I see Verity first. So Verity, would you like to introduce yourself and your farm and yeah, get us kicked off here?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm Verity Megginson. I live and farm in a village called Kirkburn, which is in East Yorkshire. And I've got a 300-acre arable farm, which in the past couple of years I've started adding sheep into the system. So I've added Exlana sheep into those. When I first started farming, completely conventional, was slightly aghast as to the things that were done to the land, decided I wouldn't really want to be eating the food that I was producing, had to have a bit of a rethink, and talking to different people, doing the usual of a bit of Gabe Brown, reading Dirt to Soil, had my eyes opened a bit and went down the lines of Mintill, and then pushed more and more to regen, and done that more and more in the past 2 years, really.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. How about Tom? You're up next.
Sorry, just finding the microphone. I'm Tom Fairfax from Mindrum in Northumberland, up on the Scottish border. We are a mixed farm, cattle, sheep and arable. We're organic and we're farming using a regenerative mindset. My approach here is sort of based on trying to harness the natural systems at play on the ground wherever we can. So rather than necessarily being driven by the tools in front of us, I'm trying to focus a little bit on the effects we seek to deliver, and then use the best tools available to deliver them. Obviously, impacts are something we need to be aware of, and so that's something to bear in mind. So it's really what we're doing here in the context of tonight. It's about using the correct tool correctly, but as I think some of us have discussed before, noting that a fool with a tool is still a fool.
I love that. And I remember on last time we met up at your farm, you said that same exact thing. And I've said it no less than a dozen times to people. And I always credit you with it. It always cracks me up. So thanks, Tom. And last but certainly not least, Reese.
Hi, yeah, I'm Reese Jones. I'm a farm manager for Tom Pearson, who some of you may be familiar with, west of Cambridge. We're on sort of heavier hand slope series clays, all arable, but we have a shepherd integrating his livestock into our system on covers and some cereal grazing as well. And I've been here since 2022. Tom started some direct drilling and regenerative transition stuff sort of 2016 onwards, and then the last few years, we've really accelerated that. Really pulled our inputs back, changed some machinery and some tools, and hopefully starting to see a bit of an impact.
Thanks, Reese. Yeah, I was on your all's farm a couple months ago now, and you guys are doing some excellent things there. So I'm excited to dig into that with you a little bit. Stu, how about for any guests that don't know your farm, maybe just like a 30-second intro to yours and any initial topics you have on the top, any talking points on the topic of kit.
Okay. So mine's mainly livestock. We do a little bit of arable on the side, but mainly livestock. Just sheep and cattle. Moving slightly more into cattle over the years, I have to say. And everyone knows my thoughts on all that. So yeah, moving slightly towards cattle over the years, and thoroughly enjoying what we've been doing on farm and seeing how things change and what sort of tools we might have thought was hugely important at the start, then perhaps are not quite as important the more we learn and take a step back, as it were. So it's interesting. But obviously, having been to Groundswell for the last few years, there's been a huge drive from what was probably quite a naive and innocent event has now very, very, very I don't use the word polluted, but it's got a lot of people there who are there to sell something. So it's I guess the top of this conversation is trying to pick through the meat and bones of what's actually going to make a big difference and what maybe is perhaps a bit of salesman's patter, shall we say. So everyone has a different context where a tool might be useful for someone that isn't useful to someone else. So that's the beauty of it all. But a good place might be to start with maybe Verity, if that's all right. And we could just say, having come from conventional and then going to slightly more regenerative stuff, what does that involve for you on an arable farm in terms of have we got rid of some gear? And we're going to talk to Reese about that in a minute as well. But what have you done there that's sort of helped that shift, shall we say? You're muted.
Our first victim of the night.
Sorry, beginner. Sorry. I think, I suppose when I started running the farm, I've got some contractors who were also conventional. I think part of it was getting their brains a bit into the brain space of what I was thinking of trying for a start. And it's as much about the tools of the machinery around you, it's the brains as the tools as well, I suppose, like Tom's touched on, which is a forever problem, really. So for Mintill wise, I sort of armed myself with the Claydon kit. So I purchased a TerraStar and a straw rake, and my contractors had a Claydon drill anyway. And then I think I then got probably overexcited about regen and probably was a bit blinded as to what condition my soils were in, and I wasn't honest enough about it, or I was hoping that the roots would do the job of the compaction, and went down the direct drill route more. And the direct drill we bought had quite wide row spaces in it, so then sort of started hitting problems with weeds and the whole system just not working as great as you'd want it to, especially with the past 2 years where we've had a lot of rain. I'm on quite clayey land and it washed a lot of the nutrients away. And then obviously with it being quite dry last harvest. So I've gone from Claydon to the Claydon system to a direct drill with mixed results to then a Verdistat Rapid with a conversion kit on it for narrower row spaces. Which seems to do a bit of a job of if you want to hardly have any tillage at all, you can have nearly none and it nearly be a direct drill, or you can work the ground a bit more. We have then subsoiled quite a lot of the land. We have subsoiled the land. I think when I first spoke to you, Stuart, about 2 years ago, and I was horrified that I was going to have to think about ripping up a field to reset it, and I was completely traumatized by this thought process. But that field actually yielded half a ton to the acre more than the field next to it that we hadn't subsoiled, and that was this harvest. So we have actually built a low disturbance subsoiler with a roller behind it, and ended up low disturbance subsoiling the rest of the farm, but I haven't had to subsoil that field again. The fingers crossed, we might now be into a system where the roots can actually get down, and the winter cover crops, the roots are the longest that I've ever known on this farm in the past 6 years. Fingers crossed with the weather for the rest of the winter, it doesn't chuck it down with rain, and I can get enough roots down to keep it all, the biology going. And it's like what we talk about a lot, it's all a circle. You can't just put a hunk of metal in the ground to achieve what you're trying to achieve. But for this farm, I've talked about it at length with all sorts of people. We felt in the end that it did need that reset, but that will only then work if you can follow it up with the roots and the biology within the soil.
That's exactly right. You know, if I had a bingo card, I think one of the maybe the middle square for me would be, it's not really the practice, it's how you follow up the practice, no matter the question, right? So, you know, Stu and I get asked all the time about tillage or glyphosate or whatever, and those are important, and they're important topics, and certainly people can feel very strongly about them. But I think our point where we try to get people to think is, let's think about the action afterwards. So we have to reduce that potentially negative practice over time. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. With, you know, you create that space, you create that space for water and air, but it's going to close up, and you're just going to revert back to normal if you do what got you to that place in the first place, right? So biology is certainly one thing that'll keep it open, right? And that leads us to Judith's questions, where she asked, when you're subsoiling, Verity, do you dribble biology down the legs into the soil?
No, so the fields that are going into spring cropping this spring, we broadcast on winter grazing cover crop, and then we've subsoiled after that with the roller on behind it, so it's just one pass after broadcasting the crop on. So, and then the sheep are grazing on that, so there's no I don't have the facility for a dribble bar or anything like that. And then the winter crops we've subsoiled, and then the winter wheat's gone straight in with the Verdostat drill.
Very good. Thank you for that. Now, you brought up briefly contractors, if I remember correctly. That's a tricky subject. How, I understand you have a nice relationship with your contractor, but, you know, just in general, maybe opening it up to the panel, how do we have those discussions with our contractors that we want things done a certain way with a change of equipment? You know, that can be very difficult. And if anybody had any experience with that, yeah, just like to hear anybody's thoughts.
Maybe same but different. But with the shepherd who we have on the farm, sort of with his flying flock, the last few years we've just been, you know, grazing whole fields and grazing until there's not a lot left. And it was kind of purposeful, because I felt removing most of the biomass makes things easier for me drilling in the spring on sort of cold, wet clays coming out of winter. But actually starting to find a little bit of compaction at a few inches of depth, and there's no way to say it's definitely the sheep, but the likelihood is that, you know, they're definitely a contributing factor. So yeah, we've had to have the discussion about regular moving and smaller paddocks, and we're not moving every day, because I think it's too much work, and I don't know whether, I'm not sure what I think about mob grazing with sheep, whether it quite works as well as with cattle, but it was, yeah, it took a bit of wearing him down, to be fair, the extra effort. And, you know, but actually now we've got into the swing of it, he loves it, because he reckons it's easier. He doesn't need to put as much fencing out at one time. When it's time to move them, it takes him 40 minutes to put, you know, the next 3 sides on the next square. I've got everything mowed ahead of him, so it's easy, and everything's staying cleaner as well. Feet are cleaner, and everyone's that bit happier actually for it. So yeah, it took a bit of wearing him down, but actually now can't stop him sending me YouTube videos of mob grazing cattle and stuff. So hopefully he's turned a corner.
Awesome. That's awesome. Tom, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think that, and Verity brought it up as well, that this thing that it's really important that everybody, especially with contractors, understands everybody else's objectives. And if the objectives aren't aligned, then it's going to go to rat shit. Excuse my French. I think everybody needs to get the same joke and be understanding the same thing. I think one of the challenges about the whole regenerative piece is quite often people are talking the same words but seeing different pictures, and it's really clear that we're all clear about what we want to achieve. I had a really good example of that actually. That a couple of years ago, I was trying to get my contract. I used lots of contractors because I want to use lots of different bits of kit, and I can't afford to buy them all just for little bits. And so I spend a lot of time trying different things. We were trying to break the surface of a herbal lay with a top down, and I spoke to the guy driving the tractor. I told him I was wanting to take the top off the plantain, but I wasn't wanting to take the growing point out. And so, he was looking with this enormous bit of kit, and I was explaining what I wanted him to do. And I was happened to come over the hill, and I wasn't spying on him, but I happened to come over the hill and see him doing it. And bless him, every 5 minutes he was jumping off the back of the tractor and checking what was happening behind him. And 3 weeks later, I happened to meet him up on the top of the farm. He'd come up after work in his own car just to see whether the plantain had survived. And that for me was absolute turning point, because he'd suddenly got the joke as to what we were doing. And that's really exciting. But I think people do need to genuinely get the joke. And I think that's a real challenge in terms of communicating what we're trying to achieve and why.
Excellent. Now, have you had the opposite experience where some of your contractors haven't gotten the joke?
Not too bad. Most of my I farm at the end of a valley, and all my contractors are neighbours. So I know where they live, if that makes sense. But so I've been pretty lucky, but I do know people who have had challenges. And sometimes that's, it's one of these relationships that's never going to happen. But sometimes it's just simply a communication thing, and assuming that everybody is talking the same language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, Stu, now you mentioned maybe tossing it over to Reese and talking about his experience of transitioning equipment. Reese, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so before I started here, Tom had bought a 4-meter John Deere 750A in 2016, and he'd done it he'd convinced his dad on the proviso that it was to move less soil, to chit less blackgrass, but I think really it was a Trojan horse, because he wanted to do some direct drilling. And so 2016 onwards, we moved, block by block, sort of doing what Tom felt was necessary beforehand, whether it had a hard reset with the plow or a subsoil or what have you, until the year before I started, everything was being direct drilled. And so after 2 full further seasons, so 2024, we had a big farm sale. So we cleared out all the heavy cultivation kit. There was 2 plows and a class 7 5E and no end of horsepower and things we didn't use. But out the other side of it, all we managed to buy was one newer tractor and a 12-meter Avatar to be pulled by the new tractor. But that was sort of what we felt was the next step in our transition, because now at 12 meters we can do controlled traffic, and I'm on wider row spacing, so I can drill between the rows of last year's stubble which seems to work pretty well. Beyond that, we also changed some bits with the combine. So we changed to the MacDon FD2, which means I cut all my crop, assuming I've done my job appropriately and everything stood up nicely. I cut as high as I physically can, so I can just be nipping heads off at 50 centimeters, say, which means there's a lot less chopped straw for me to drill through, because so on the contractor thing, there's no one around us that can do controlled traffic baling, and I'm quite unwilling to put that compaction in if I don't need to. I wouldn't, we're not against removing straw, but I haven't found anyone with the right kit to not put more wheelings in, which then potentially makes more work for me.
So when you're doing all this arable stuff, Reese, obviously yours is primarily an arable operation. So when you've got this machinery coming in, and I'm going to ask a stupid question because we know the answer, but I think it's worth talking about. You've talked about bringing the animals in as well. What's the driving motivation of that? Because obviously they're in an arable operation, that themselves is a tool, and it would be interesting just from your purely arable perspective, and we'll get Verity's as well, because obviously she's bringing livestock in. What's the driving force behind that?
I guess, yeah, a real mixture. I mean, firstly, they bring their own biology. And like I said before, with the nature of our sort of cold clay soils, cover crops do wonders, and I can find lovely rooting and what have you, but I don't, to establish a successful spring crop afterwards, I don't necessarily want all the biomass. So from that perspective, I kind of see them as like mobile composters almost. I mean, they're really inefficient graziers. I think from what I can understand, they only keep like 30% of what they take in the front, so it's of no great detriment to me, and they remove a lot of stuff that's potentially in my way. And also, where I guess doing it the other way around, if I were to rely solely on glyphosate, maybe some people are spraying off in January and then again just before they drill, which is just, I don't want to do that. Once is plenty. And then also running them across cereals sort of this time of the year. So once the cover crops have run out, we'll graze the forward wheats and winter barley, and that's really helpful for growth regulation and for removing disease. So pull fungicide use. Well, where I've done it, we've not used any. To be fair, it's been really successful.
How long have you been grazing those cereals for? Like how many years?
It would be 3 years now we've been doing it, and when we were growing oilseed rape, did the oilseed rape as well, and each time I've left a check strip, and each time the yield's been better, so nicely reassuring.
To hear that, it's really good. Verity, have you got anything slightly different you want to add to that that discussion there in terms of why you're bringing the livestock in?
It's just for me, it's the most natural way of trying to get biology into the soil, really. In the past I've put chicken muck on, compost, but you still don't actually know properly what you're putting on unless you have every single load analysed, and still then you don't know. The sheds where the chicken mucks, I've bought that from, I don't know if the chickens have been on antibiotics, whether there's other chemicals in it that aren't going to be screened. So really you still don't know what you're putting on unless you go all the way back to bagged fertilizer, which you still don't properly know what you're putting on, but it's definitely not good for the soil. So for me it was the most natural system for the land. And I think Tom, well, you guys will help me with this one, with the sheep actually eating the plant, the enzymes that are released from the roots of the plant and adding it to the biology that way. I just thought it was the most natural way to do it, really. And I'm getting, for my mind, another diversification to the farm with selling the meat. We're just about to sell this time for the first year, the first crop of lambs direct sales wise. So we'll see how how that goes. We're just in 6 to 8 weeks opening up a farm vending shop. So just to stock regen products. So it's another form of diversification, really, that seemed to fit a pure arable farm doesn't really make sense. There's a piece of the jigsaw missing unless you put livestock on it.
Oh, that's interesting. It's really good to hear that, Verity.
Do I get a gold?
Sorry,
do I get a gold star for that now?
For now, you do. You got a gold star. Well done, Verity. Well done. Well with you, obviously. Okay, so whilst we're on the subject, we both mentioned there a bit of biology about how that's the sort of key point there, and obviously it is. And we're on the subject of arable, so we'll stick with it for now. Does anyone dabble with compost tea brewing, and is that a tool that anyone sort of utilizes on theirs?
We do a little bit. I think there's a really interesting piece here on the biology, and there's lots and lots. Of course, there's lots of different ways to crack it. And I think, like all these things, we've done quite a lot of work with compost teas and compost extracts and things like that, and indeed vermicast. We've come to the conclusion, certainly where I am, I'm mainly I'm sheep, cattle, and arable in that order. So we have lots. I absolutely echo what Verity and Rhys have said about the livestock being the best way to get biology onto the ground. I'm finding that the compost teas are essentially a tactical intervention, and really good as seed treatment, really good as root treatments if you're planting plugs and trees and things like that. But they don't necessarily work unless you're doing all the other things too. And the conclusion we've come to is that your biology is livestock. It just doesn't have legs. And so if you put it onto a dead bit of ground, it's going to die because it's not got the right conditions. So, a lot of those biology, a lot of the biology, including the stuff that comes out of a bag, if you haven't created conditions for it to thrive, it's probably not going to.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, totally agree with that, Tom. Anything from anyone else on that subject?
Yeah, we're guilty of quite a lot of faffing. I see you smirking. Yeah, you caught me. Yeah, so on the farm it's me and Shona who works with me, and one of the rain. Shona came because, well, we were short of a person, but also her specialties are compost and sap testing, which was where I felt weak, because I thought with the new drill there was grant money available to get a liquid applicator, so it made sense. And with battling my hardest to bring my fungicide use down, understanding sap seemed like a logical route as well. So yes, we do Johnson Sioux compost extracts and then applying them with a tank that's fitted to the drill, which drops it just straight on top of the seed when we're drilling, and just doing that every time we're drilling. So whether that's cover crops or cash crops, and we've also started some vermicomposting after seeing Tom talk about it at Groundswell. Shona got very excited, so came out with some designs, and we've got she's called it the Worm Hotel, painted the outside. It's very nice. So yeah, I mean, I'm nowhere near as expert as Tom, but I think it's another tool. Inevitably, things I'm doing are going to hinder some soil biology, and so at every opportunity I don't see any harm, as long as it's not expensive or taking a lot of time to try and put some back. And I suppose it's a bit like throwing custard at the wall, but some of it's going to stick. And I have seen some quite nice results as well. I sent Carl the picture because I was quite smug, but I got this lovely picture of a row of wheat and a row of mushrooms grown in the same row. So something's happening. Very difficult to quantify, but felt like not wasted effort at least.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was over the moon to see that picture. That was awesome as a fungus guy. And Tom, what you said corroborates with my research actually at university was the whole point of my thesis that my PI was working on was that they wanted to inoculate tomato seeds and seedlings with a beneficial fungus called trichoderma. It's actually the most abundant fungus in the soil. And what they were finding was it worked in pots in the greenhouse, and they were seeing increased immune response from the tomatoes. I think it was botrytis that they were trying to protect against. But when they moved it outside, the results were variable. They couldn't predict any type of use or how well efficacy. And so my project was actually to then add a fungal rich leaf mold compost to half and then leave half as a control. And exactly what you said was what we found, that when we created that fungal rich environment, actually the inoculation survived. And I did some eDNA testing and found that actually, yeah, we had significantly more of those fungus that survived just because they had the environment that was conducive for them to survive. It's kind of obvious when you lay it out like that, but for anybody that loves research or wants to be proven, I can show you the data to say exactly what Tom's saying. If you build it, they'll come, and we had 60% more tomatoes that they could sell to market, and we had significantly increased resistance to fungal foliar disease. So, and it just came from composting municipal leaves, which was pretty cool. So, just wanted to throw that in there. That Tom, I totally agree. It's the environment. There's the father of virology. Actually, he's a Dutchman, and he says everything is everywhere, but the environment selects. And the more I'm into this, the more I agree. The more we build the right environment, what we want will show up. So that's me on my little stand there. So we did have a question from Leah, actually from Ian Lane. Before we get off the subject of arable, and Verity, I know you might be the one to answer this. With just taking the heads off, does anyone use a stripper header on a combine to leave all the straw standing? Verity, what's been your experience with that?
So yeah, we didn't run the stripper header this harvest because, to be honest, with the drought and potentially what yields we were going to get, again, well, I decided to bail for the first time again in a few years, just for the extra income. Year before that, yeah, we've run a stripper header, which the best outcome of that was the fact that for the next season in that we had the standing straw through winter, broadcast a cover crop into it to graze the sheep on over the winter. And what I'd be interested to know, to try and run a few more experiments on, was whether there was less compaction from the sheep than grazing that over winter because they were on the standing straw. So there wasn't a single lameness in the sheep. The sheep were happy. They, in various places, the straw, flattened, things like that. We did have a few problems come spring with the straw that was left on the ground and then trying to work it into the soil. But that field had growth rate inhibitors on it and fungicides at that rate. So whether, as I'm now withdrawing those, the straw would break down quicker, in theory it should. So I'm looking forward to doing that. So definitely this winter, with having subsoiled and then it's rained quite a bit, I am wishing that where the sheep are, I did have that standing straw to graze the sheep on, to protect, because it just leaves roots for longer in the ground and the soil's covered. Where we experimented a bit, and where we'd broadcast the cover crop on the seed, we then rolled some of it as well. And it does seem that the actual rolled standing straw, it seems to create a little microclimate where the seed germinates quicker, whether it retains the moisture or the heat or the biology or a bit of everything. So there's quite a few interesting experiments to run, really, moving forward with the stripper header. They're quite, I think, Reese, you've used one a bit, haven't you? Your combine driver really needs to know what they're doing. And every field's very different when you go into each field with how fast you need to run the combine, the stripper header. So it's a bit of an art to it as well, which is very different to a conventional header on a combine. But there's lots of bonuses for me how the system seems to be turning out the best for the soil into keeping that standing straw there. So hopefully this harvest, we'll get to use it again a bit and keep some more standing straw.
Reese, anything to add there?
No, only that I'm rather jealous. I'd quite like to go with a stripper header, but I think, well, just the way that arable farming works and how pressed we are at harvest time, I'd probably need one of each for my inevitable cock-ups when there's crops laid on the ground, or things that the stripper header couldn't touch. So that's why we've got the Macdon, which is kind of like a poor man's stripper header when used in such a way, and it does work well. You get similar sort of outcome. I take a lot less through the combine. My output's a lot quicker because I'm hardly chopping anything, and the chop straw is the thing that with the single disc is hard to drill through and without getting hairpinning. But no, nothing much to add, just jealousy.
And I can't remember, Verity, was it your farm or another one that had the picture of the spider webs? It might have been someone else, but they said that the number of spiders in their field was just enormous when they had chopped or cut higher on the plant. Was that you or is that someone else?
I don't think it was me particularly with the photo, but you're right. The whole ecosystem, for whether it be the larger animals, birds, things like that, for protection for the wildlife in it is quite interesting to see it stood. But like we said, you do have to be careful about hairpinning with it. So it's a bit of a different system when you are combining, and you do have to be quite strict with your trailer drivers with the combine, that they're only driving in a certain direction. But it's not, it's not that bit of it's not that tricky to get the hang of. You just have to keep everybody reminding of it when somebody decides to hit reverse in a trailer and sort of go in a different way around the field, the difference that makes then to how the drill will run. But again, that comes down to how quickly the straw's going to break down, really. And once you've got the whole system and the biology working, hopefully again that will be a bit of a different ball game. So we shall see. Fingers crossed. It's definitely a very different way of doing things, and people that have got used mentally to the safety of a conventional header on a combine, it works in such a different way. Quite a lot of people are worried about the losses from it, so you do have to be careful about that as well. And it's the setting up of it and the driving of it which is very different. So you need somebody who you can sort of trust to sort that out.
That's really interesting. Sorry, go on, Reece. Go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think the harvest management is a really good point as well, because once you sort of not have to outright commit to not moving soil, but once you've decided that's you want to do as little as possible, then suddenly residue management and compaction at harvest is it's as important as getting the crop off. It's helpful that I drive the combine is basically what I'm saying, because I'm thinking about how well my chop's spreading, how fine my chop is, how high I'm cutting the stubble all the time, and keeping an eye on where trailer drivers are, making sure they're driving in the right direction and on the tram lines, and not adding compaction that's going to cause me bother, which I would rather not remove if I don't have to.
Yeah, good. Thanks. That's good advice, that, Reece. I was just going to say that I was on a farm, and I forget where it is now, so apologies. But I was on a farm, and they were using an undersown spring barley, and then taking the combine in high. I don't know if it was a stripper header or not, but they were just taking heads off. But then they were left with an understory of whatever it was they planted with the straw alongside it. So then it was creating a nice carbon to nitrogen ratio sort of fodder for the cattle to go straight into, which actually was quite a good way of sort of extending that grazing season quite late in the year without necessarily having to take stuff out and sort stuff out. They got the bit off the crop they wanted, and then they left the straw there and just ate it in situ. And it was actually really quite a good little system they created there. So just thought I'd throw that in there as well as we were talking about that. Judith made a point here just about biology applied with the seed means there's when the roots grow, and it's the fastest way to increase biology in the soil as the roots feed them. That's a good point, Judith. Yeah, I think in terms of return on investment and time, putting that sort of compost or biology onto the seed is probably about as cheap a thing as you can do for a really fantastic result a lot of the time. So I really do agree with that. I don't know if anyone else agrees with that as well, but that's kind of where I stand with a lot of those amendments. That's probably one of the cheapest things you can do, and it's not too much hassle to get it a lot of the time, but we can get huge results from. Tom's giving me thumbs up, so that's good. Don't even know how you did that, so well done, Tom.
Yeah, I'd agree with that just on the basis of how nature works. I learned recently that the plant, just like let's say a mammal birth, the mother gives the children or the progeny some of its first microbiome. It literally seeds her child's microbiome, and what they're finding is the plant does the same thing. And so, I mean, that's kind of how nature works, is that first microbiome or that beneficial biology is literally on the seed itself. And that's one of the reasons why, if possible, I do encourage folks to look at not using seed treatments with some of those harsh chemicals and trying to put more beneficial biology right on the soil. Now, I know that's not possible. It's not possible to source everything you want. And actually, Stu, it wasn't Christine Jones. Who's the guest that we had? She's extremely smart about
Chris
fungi.
Nichols.
Chris Nichols was saying that actually some of those fungicidal seed treatments aren't as bad as you would think. So, it's not a hard and fast rule, but in general, I just think try and follow nature. And what nature does is it puts that first beneficial biology directly on the soil. And again, also when you look at the bulk soil, it's billions, trillions of microbes. We can't even imagine the scope and scale. And if we think we're going to put just a few on the soil and they're going to dominate the whole situation, and the research I've seen, it just doesn't work out like that. It needs to be right by that first radical root where it's going to get exudates, and that's going to give it the best opportunity. And like Stu said, your best return on your investment, whether it's money or your time. And Charlie Meadows has just said, and saving seed from your own ecology will more likely have the microbiome for your land. That's exactly right. And every generation, you're switching on and off epigenetics. Dr. Alan Williams and Gabe talked so much about that. And yeah, every successive generation gets a little more acclimated to your little tiny microclimate. I totally agree. Sorry, Stu, go ahead.
I was just telling you to keep going, Carl. I thought you were just padding out really well there. So. I think whilst we're on the subject of arable, we'll stick with it. Sorry, livestock guys, we will swing back that way in a minute. I'm slightly out of my comfort zone here, so I'm enjoying the discussion. So with regard to the arable, the guys who've made changes, changed a lot of things. What sort of advice would you maybe, if you had to give one bit of advice for anyone who's looking to go down this arable route, and a lot of them would go and say, I'm buying a direct drill, or I am stopping plowing, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but what's the one bit of advice you'd say to those guys who, having gone through a bit of this process, what would be the best bit that you could say to them for them easing into an arable scenario without making too much of a cock-up?
Sorry, Verity.
I'd say the observation is key. Know where your starting point is, know where your soils are, but also be really truly honest about that and work out, even if you've got a thought process of where you'd like to be and what you'd like to use in an ideal world, are you actually there, and will that work? or not, as the case may be.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, don't rush, and probably don't take things out of the toolkit unnecessarily, because it's all snakes and ladders, and sometimes you have to do things that are necessary to both stay profitable and, you know, continue the journey. And, you know, turning cultivation off from day one is, you know, it might mean it doesn't work, and then you're really disheartened, and then you think it's never going to work, and then you know, you never make any progress. So I think taking your time, and like Verity says, observation is key, because it's, yeah, it takes time and patience and different way of thinking.
Yeah, I think the way I kind of think about it is something that Stu says all the time, which is earning the right to do the things that we want to do, whether it be no-till or pulling back from chemicals. I think a lot of times we expect our land or the ecosystem we're managing to perform like an Olympic athlete when it is on its last leg. You know, it can barely stand up, right? And so like they're saying, take honest stock of where your land is at, how well it's performing, and then you'll save yourself a lot of heartache and a lot of wasted money by understanding where you're at in this transition, and then appropriately matching the equipment and the kit, and then step by step moving forward over time to go in the direction you want to go. Bilal asks, on the subject of arable, is there a book, literature, or resource that can help someone gain more knowledge? On the subject of just arable agriculture in general, I'd have to think.
Judith's answered that question pretty well just below that, if you want to just read that out.
Yeah. So Judith says, follow John Kempf and Advancing Eco Ag. Absolutely. She says online, but also the Regenerative Agriculture podcast is a great one that John Kempf does. Joel Williams is another excellent resource. And if you're interested in composting and compost teas and fermentations, join the Farm Made Biofruits group on Facebook. So thanks for that, Judith. All great resources. Bilal, if you ever want to, for the rest of the chat, maybe type in a specific topic, maybe that'd give us a better idea of where we could point you in terms of a book as well. So feel free to do that. Stu, now, without further ado, would you like to jump into your comfort zone and talk more about the livestock side?
Yeah, I will. Before we do that, I think there's a question from someone who's down as M there, and I didn't want to just bypass that as well. I was saving it for when we did get towards the livestock side of stuff, but
yep.
In terms of utilizing livestock to improve soil health seems to be well accepted, which is very true. But non-organic livestock will be depositing varying pesticide as a result of the treatments they've received. Any indication of how conventional versus organic livestock stack up regarding beneficial effects? So does anyone want to go into the the conventional organic debate right now? Set out your stall. I know Tom's organic, so it'll be interesting to see what his thoughts are on that.
It's interesting. Actually, I don't have very much data about how much of the toxins, I suspect it depends on what you're actually talking about, comes through the beast onto the ground. And certainly from a point of view of wormers and things like that, and obviously as organic we can worm with fecal egg count, to actually minimize what's coming through. I'm thinking that standing back, it's a complex area, but what's really clear is that everything we do, everything we don't do, everything we fail to do or forget to do is likely to have an impact. What we've got to do is just watch the impact and try and mitigate it. I think that it obviously depends what you're putting in. I think somebody mentioned earlier, I think it might have been Verity, the thing about the hormones coming in, and that worries me. There's quite a lot of forever chemicals going into stuff, and that I think is possibly a concern. But I don't have any data on that. But we are dealing with complex systems, and there's a lot going on. So the system will mitigate that to an extent, I'd suspect. But there's a lot of things that are going to keep coming through the system. So I think we just need to be really canny and keep our eyes open. I think there's a lot we can achieve by keeping our eyes open and using common sense.
Thanks for that, Tom.
Anyone else want to add to that, Party?
I guess it's probably an oversimplification, but I would think that probably the dose is the poison, and so small grazing passes for in our situation where it's once or twice a year. I should think, or I'd like to hope, the system's got time to, like Tom says, to mitigate any residues that come through the animal.
Yeah, the two things I've heard most are that chicken manure that's been fed glyphosate rich, let's say, corn back in the States. They have found legacy glyphosate in
Yes.
chicken manure. So be aware of that, I guess. Whatever process is going on in the chicken, it seems to slide through the body. And then number two is I've seen quite a bit of research to show that dung beetles, are harmed for quite a long time with anthelmintic ivermectin type products. So those are the two things that I do know that can potentially harm the biology. And thinking about the subsequent crop and herbicide residuals.
Yeah.
I think one thing I would probably throw in as well is that in terms of the organic versus conventional sort of thing, I think if we're being brutally honest, we know that organic has access to those medicinal products as well when it's needed. So it's maybe not that sort of debate. It's what products are we using, and as you've all said, what's the effects of them. We do quite a bit of work with Leanne Oliver, who's a vet, and when she's prescribing stuff, she's very selective about what she's telling people to use based on the repercussions of what might happen to the soil and the biology within the soil. So speak to your vet, have a word with them, and try and decide or make the right assessment based on how long that stuff's going to stay active for, because some of those products can be really damaging, whereas some of them can be, or apparently are mitigated very, very rapidly. So
I think as far as wormers go as well, we've all got to be aware of the resistance that there is starting as well. So it's at the moment I'm just selectively worming really the sheep, but I've got ex-laners, so in theory they're meant to be more naturally resistant. So I'm trying to be really strict with myself about which I breed from, which I cull. Anything that is treated is well marked or documented, and that will come out of my system. It won't stay in the system. In an ideal world, I'd like to end up sort of with a closed system, so I'm not having to get too much coming in from outside that you don't know where it's been. But who knows, really? That's maybe an ideal world that is very difficult to achieve.
I think one thing that has become quite clear, certainly in our system, is that actually sometimes it is very complex, but sometimes it's not that complex. It's a question of actually looking at what you're looking for. And certainly fecal egg counting, which isn't difficult for those with livestock, is really powerful, because you can actually see when there's an issue. A lot of us use microscopes and look at the soil as well. Really interesting. You can see when stuff's going onto it. You can see the feel, and it's not necessarily the quantitative assessment of things, because that's a very a difficult area, because the soil ecosystem is so astonishingly complex. But you can definitely see when it's going forward, when it's coming back, much as you do when you walk into a field and you get a feel for how it's doing. That feel when you get it through the gills. You can feel when something's wrong. When you walk into a pack of sheep, you can tell there's a problem before you find the sheep that's limping, because it's that feel. And I think that a lot of this, it's a question of really just using not just the technical controls and the technical analysis that we have, but using our own instincts and our own judgment as well, because we've got an astonishing bit of kit on our shoulders, most of us. And it's amazing how effective that can be in terms of seeing what's happening in common sense.
Yeah, good point, Tom. Thanks for that. I think we all maybe sometimes underestimate that we do have some good input from our own selves at times, don't we? So yeah, observations are key as well. I love that, Verity, that whole thing about observations. I think that's so important. So yeah, it's super important. So if no one else has got anything else to add to the arable side of things, and if there's no more questions, if there is questions, do fire them in. We'll come back to it. It's not a problem, but I think we'll maybe move slightly towards. Oh, Kyle's got one straight away. Come on then.
We do have one more on the arable side before we leave it. Is that all right, Stu?
Absolutely.
All right. So for me and Lane, yes, moving from the field to the barn, are there any crop dryers that have heat recovery systems, for example, with mobile dryers, with energy being the major cost of crop drying? I personally do not. So.
Yeah, I don't really know either. We're pretty well. On one hand, unfortunate. On the other, fortunate. We're in a very dry area of the country and hardly have to dry anything. So, yeah, grain dryers isn't my specialty.
And I'm very sorry, I've got nothing to contribute to that. Sorry.
Ian, I'll make a note of that, and I'll do a little research after this. And if you drop your email in, I'll send you a message on that. Floor is yours, Stu.
I thought we might just head into some sort of livestock equipment discussion now. So it might be quite nice to, we have touched on what livestock people have, just to go over it again, sort of what people use. I really guess, let's start with maybe Tom. I know you've got quite a diverse mix of livestock and sheep there. I just wondered what tools you would consider you've necessarily bought. I mean, obviously the basics is the electric fencing and stuff like that. If you've got any advice to throw out when you're talking about that, that's really good as well. Where did you start and where have you ended up?
It's interesting. One of the things that we have done is we've got smaller in terms of our kit, so and lighter. So we've got rid of our, to my son's horror, we've got rid of our old Land Rovers, which everybody loved, but they were ripping up the ground. And we have these Kawasaki mules, which are brilliant and float over the ground. They're a bit soft, possibly, but they definitely do a lot less damage. And obviously, one of the key things is that you can't really get away without is having the handling kit, and that and obviously the better and the more effective it is, the better. One of the things I think that we're looking at as a challenge at the moment, I'm trying to get more and more outside with my cattle and my sheep, and certainly they're all still outside at the moment. And we'll bring them in. We're going to carve and lamb inside, more actually for the team than the livestock, if that makes sense. But I'd love to get to the stage where everything's happening outside. And again, there will be a certain amount of kit required in terms of calf handling. One thing we have done since we've been in this sort of regenerative model is a lot simple things like ring feeders. Ring feeders are the bane of my life, because if you're not chucking about chemistry to persecute thistles and things, and indeed you're trying to harness a lot of the weeds, then suddenly you see the impact that things like ring feeders are having on the ground, and it's something we really noticed. So we've got one of these bale unrollers, which is absolutely stunning, and not just for producing the food, getting the food out in the ground and preventing damage, but also for reseeding some of the old grass. We have a couple of diverse hay meadows, and we cut late seed hay and spread that. We feed the cattle and the sheep with that, And it's amazing how the seeds in that are already beginning to increase the diversity. You know how hard it is to get anything to grow in a 100-year-old sward, and it's almost impossible. But if you chuck a whole lot of hay on it, and it's moving it all the time. And whilst there is a little bit of wastage, it's not really wasted because it's all going back into the system and it's reseeding it. So that's really powerful. And obviously snackers as well, and all of that sort of thing, and sort of working with the kit. I think possibly, certainly in my system, the most important bit of kit has been the spearhead cutter, the topper, if that makes sense, to help condition the ground where we have to. Sometimes we're now actively working with thistles, having persecuted them, because it's very clear, certainly in our system, that they're doing a job, and they're nutrient cycling and nutrient pumping. And if we can get the thistles through their nutrient cycle in a year rather than 5 years, suddenly they stop growing, although the seeds are still in the soil. And that was a bit of a surprise, and it was quite exciting. And so I'm sort of rethinking my views on some of the things like thistles. But so from a kit point of view, really, I suppose one of the things that's really impacted us has been the fact, not necessarily the livestock kit, but the way that we've been able to use livestock as part of the engineering process for possibly our reseeding or our arable side. So, for instance, if you're bale grazing a bit of ground heavily, then you don't need to, and we do plough occasionally, we shallow plough. I'm a bit of a believer that it's not the plough, the cow, the sow, or the yow. It's how you do it. It's the how. And if you can achieve if you can achieve a 12-inch functional A horizon in your soil, and you only plough the top 5 inches, then the biology doesn't take long to move back up again. And so done in a mindful way, it works pretty well. But we're also finding that using the livestock in an engineering capacity, I think Reese was talking about grazing the winter cereals. I think Verity mentioned it too. And for me, that's absolutely stunning. But, also putting the cattle pretty hard onto a cover crop or a stubble then means you need to use a lot less diesel on it the next day, the next season, to actually establish something. So that works quite well for us in our model. We have a more complex, we have a lot more growing in the fields though, on the grounds that I used to like a nice field of wheat with nothing but wheat in it. Now I'm pretty disappointed if there's not a lot growing around its feet, if that makes sense. But that works in my model. It's not for everybody. So I'm thinking that from a livestock kit point of view, obviously it's the handling kit that's important, but actually integrating the livestock with the rest of the farm is a really, really powerful piece. And sometimes it's not necessarily intuitive. But that's possibly only a result of the last 20 years' experience. I suspect our parents might have found it more logical.
Yeah, some really good points there, Tom. Thanks for that. I'm going to give you a little bit of a chance to plug your bale and winder. That's not yours, obviously, but the one you have, just for people that are wondering, what was that bale and winder and roller that you're using?
It's it is. I'm having a senile moment. I can't remember its name. It's the logical one. I will find it out and put it. I will put it in the text, in the chat. But it's a.
Don't worry, Tom. You've been sensible and not plugging items.
Senile.
Makes sense.
I'm sorry about that. It's not.
It makes complete sense.
Don't worry. Yeah. It's one I'm
sorry, threw you out there on the spot there. Sorry
I don't
about
know
that.
whether it's at risk of being highly inappropriate. I don't know whether it's senility or hair color, but it's one of the two.
That's fine. It'll come to you at some point. Someone's suggesting the Bale Burgeon and roll. I
Yeah.
know there's the
It's
Mitchell
not.
one as well in Scotland. Is there a Mitchell one in Scotland? Is that right? Yeah.
There are some really good ones.
Yeah, there's
but
plenty out there, and I think they're
yeah.
all based around the same sort of model these days.
Yeah.
But they are,
Yeah.
as Tom said there, if we're going to get large amounts of heavyweight, shall we say, bales out to fields, they're a fantastic item for getting out there without making a mess. Having been someone who spent a lot of years taking a lot of silage out to fields with a tractor, the mess that gets made in that scenario is there for a long time with these bale and winders. It gives you a huge chance to get those bales out, lay down some carbon, lay down some seeds, loads of manure as you hold animals there for a lot longer and stimulate biology. There's a whole host of benefits that go with them. So they're really good. So anyone else have an experience with the unwinder before we move on to that? Anyone else got anything to say, positive or negative? No, it's good. That's fine. In terms of the other two there, I'm not going to throw you both under the bus, but in terms of that, the sheep wise, I know you guys aren't naturally in the livestock zone, but what sort of livestock equipment have you guys had to sort of been pushed into getting, whether it's posts, fences, reels, any sort of advice that you can offer to people on that front would be obviously hugely appreciated for a lot of people, I'm sure.
The first thing I obviously had to buy was a mobile handling system. So I bought a Bateman system, which is heavier, but was cheaper. And I did manage to get the FETF grant to half fund that. So that was, the timing of that was fantastic. I also, in the same grant, got my electric fencing and my energizers as well. With the electric fencing, it's quite a love-hate relationship. It's the learning that you do as you go along. You sort of speak to people, watch bits of films on YouTube on how to use, etc. But it's definitely a learning curve with you learning how to use it. And I think everybody probably finds the best way of using it for their own system and what they do. Definitely with the sheep, probably the best form of kit you can have is a sense of humour at all times. So I look after the sheep with my 3 children, 2 oldest boys, 17 and 14, and my daughter aged 11. That was quite interesting to start off with, getting them to sort of work together. But it's amazing what we've all learned, all 4 of us, and can now manage to do, and what they've learned. It's quite amazing, really. And as long as one person out of the 4 can keep a sense of humour, we're all right, really. And it's a learning curve. But yeah, Kiwi Tech fencing is what I've tended to use. The solar energizers is a bit tricky. We don't seem to get enough sun. It's been very cloudy. And I'd like to say I could manage on just one solar energizer, but or you need a spare battery to be able to bring the battery in to charge the battery up.
When we had the solar energizers, that's a common sort of thing. We were running there's any amount of makes out there. We were using the Gallagher S100s at the time. When that weather does go against you in the winter, sometimes you're not maybe moving as many fences. So I found having 2 of them there and switching from one to the other day to day, back and forwards, whilst one charged up for the day. Actually, when you get into those really, really dark periods of the year, that actually worked really well just to keep the things going. It's still not going to make sheep stay in, unfortunately, all the time, because that's just in sheep's nature that they're going to get out. But it's getting those getting that power that keeps them in, sort of the main thing. I know when I first started looking at equipment, I was buying cheap and then ended up buying again not long afterwards. So I bought ungeared reels all those years ago, steel wire ungeared reels, because it was the cheapest thing I could buy. And then, unfortunately, once you start trying to do stuff like that, it makes life very difficult very quickly. So I am a big advocate that if you're going to spend money on electric fencing equipment, buy properly the first time and do it right. So for me, the best bits of advice would be buying Good geared reels. There's lots of different types out there. I'm a big fan of the Gallagher Premiums. I think they're solid geared reels. I think in terms of the electric fence wire that you might buy, sort of six core stuff that has very low resistance is a good standpoint. Anything with a high resistance that you start then laying lots of wires alongside each other, the level of power can reduce rapidly. And with sheep, again, we want to make sure that we have plenty of power there all the time. So if you can get something that's got some really low resistance wire, it keeps that power level up, especially when we get further away from home. And if you're on a mains electric fencing, someone told me years ago, buy the most expensive one you can afford for a mains energizer, because you will only ever want more power when you start moving sheep around a lot. And I did that, and I was so grateful that I did, because if you can shock sheep initially, they don't test it as much, and life's a lot easier. As soon as you start getting them wandering, it takes an awful lot of power to pull them back in line. So I certainly think that spending properly on those energizers and making sure you get the best things that you can afford at the time, which is, a sensible thing to do going forward, I would say. So
I'd also say that if you can train your lambs quite early. So when I've had the sheep in a paddock where that has been fenced, I've also quite early on in a lamb's life put up some electric fencing, maybe on a path where they tend to walk a lot, to train them to it, or it becomes important then when they're out in the big arable area. Whether that's made any difference, or whether it's just down to the breed of the sheep I've got, I don't know. And I wouldn't dare say that mine are particularly well behaved or anything, but I don't know whether it's made a difference or not, really.
No, it's great points that as well. They're very, sort of, a lot of the time, the management of the livestock from a very young age will determine how they behave later on. And certainly trying to bring in big, strong gimmers, for example, that are fairly full of themselves later on in life, who've never seen an electric fence, does take a bit of time to get them onto it. Whereas those young lambs that are on it from a young age can be really, really easily trained. I'm just looking at the comments here. There's quite a few coming through. Philip Hughes says 4 wires, not 3, to get them settled. Yeah, I'd agree. More wires the better to begin with. I do know people that have them down to 2 wires. I know someone that's really trying to do it with 1 wire, and that's very indifferent at times, I have to say. But if you can keep the feed to them so they're not necessarily hungry, they'll certainly stay in place a lot better than that. I'm just looking as well. Carolyn and David, yeah, for sheep, buy a really high energy energizer. Yeah, that's a great point. Absolutely, definitely do that. I think there's no ways around that. We will come back to solar water pumps, I think, unless anyone's got any experience on that right now that they want to talk about. I don't have a huge amount of experience with solar water pumps, but Tom obviously has. So
we've got lots of water, but none of it's in the right place. So, and of course, for a lot of the grazing strategies, water is really key. And so that's been really, really useful for us. We're in the process of, as part of a new high-tier scheme, trying to fence off a lot of we've relied on a little bit on our natural water courses, especially for the cattle. For the sheep, it's not a problem, actually, because you can just put an IBC out there. But certainly in a dry summer, the cattle ship through a hell of a lot of water. And so we have found a water pump, a solar water pump, absolutely brilliant. And there's a few makes out there, but it's been astonishingly effective. Pasture pumps, I think, are good too, but it takes the cattle a bit of time to get used to them. And if you've got a big block, if you've got a big sort of pack of cows going around, it's you need 1 or 2 of them, I think.
Yeah, good points. Good points, well made. In terms of water, since we're on about it there a bit, has anyone any experience with troughs? Does anyone have anything in particular that they use, they've bought, or they just make their own? I know I make my own at home here, but I'd be interested to see what other people are doing, if they've got any recommendations for troughs for people out there, because keeping water to livestock, as Tom's just said, is absolutely paramount, especially with cows. Especially keeping water to livestock so they're not trading back and forwards a lot, especially in the depths of the winter months. So if we can keep the water to them, I'm a huge advocate in the winter months that we keep water to livestock if we're going to give them livestock. If they're trading back a field, 2 fields to get it, there's an awful lot of footfall going back and forwards. So I like to keep it with them, pretty much in that cell with them every day. But I make my own troughs, but I just wondered if anyone else was using anything. I know Kiwi Tech, is it the Kiwi Tech trough? I know that's a really good one as well. Anyone have experience with more troughs out there? Nope, but Sean Davies has come to the rescue and mentioned that there. Kiwi Tech drag troughs have been a game changer, as they're brilliant to use on steeper fields, so that's good. I know Alex Brewster built some with a steel, and he actually has an adjustment on it, so he can tip the trough. So when he's on a hill, he can adjust the trough left to right, so it tilts and stays level all the time, which is really good. The trough scenario is something that I think, if I'm brutally honest with people, just get out and try it and use a trough and see how you get on. If you don't like it, get online. There's any amount of any amount of people who've got examples of stuff out there. WhatsApp groups are really good for that because people love sharing photos of what they've built. So there's plenty of WhatsApp groups out there with all that sort of stuff on as well, which is good. Anything else on livestock equipment in terms of the day-to-day running of livestock? No, that's good.
Is anybody using no fence?
That's exactly where I was going next, Tom. That's good. I'm glad you got there.
I'll shut
no,
up.
no, it's
I'll
good.
climb
All
back
good.
underneath my rock.
No, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Can I just
were you
throw in
gonna
one
say
thing
something about it, Tom, or were you just questioning?
No, I'm really interested. I'd love to have a go at no fence, but it seems to me to be quite expensive at the scale I'd want to use it. But I've heard that some people are using it on lead cattle, which I think might work in some contexts and not others. But I'd be really interested to hear if anybody's got is having success with it.
Yeah, I've been on quite a few farms now that are using a lot of collars. I'll give you my interpretation of what I've seen so far, unless someone's got some actual ones to use it on their farm. I don't know. Reece, you don't use collars, do you? Anything like that?
No. I just have watched some very happy videos from James Rebanks online, having a lot of success with them, and it looked amazing. It looked like it opens up a lot of options as well. Grazing unfenced areas or putting cows in woodlands without having the faff of fencing it. When it's wet or what have you. It looked really impressive.
Yeah, so my experience has been with fencing is that I was actually over on the Isle of Coll with someone who was using a lot of monol fences at the time, electric fences. They were really good. They are, I think, on a hill especially, or in some terrain that's difficult to get to, they are absolutely outstanding for allowing us to get into places, like you've just said there, Reece, that we wouldn't necessarily get to very well. I think they have a slight range within that boundary of when they're going and not going. And if we try and get a really high density with certain livestock, it makes it very difficult to do that to the densities that I possibly would like to run to at my place sometimes. If we want a high density, for example, to trample thistles or to make a huge impact on the land, I'm not sure if they can do that terribly well, is my experience so far, because I think there's too much variation within that ground. However, anything on a hill, anything that's hard to terrain, anything that's a big land mass with no natural fences or anything like that, I just think they're absolutely outstanding for creating an ability to get livestock where we want them, when we want them. I know Judith's got a hand up there because she'd used them in the past, and I've been at Judith's, and yeah, it's a really good. They're really good collars. So collars themselves have got a wonderful place to play, and in America, as Judith said, that's America. Sorry, in Scotland, as Judith says there, they have grants now that are giving out. They're not giving out because they haven't given them to very many people. They are available if you're lucky enough to get them, that you can get 100% grant on them, I believe. But someone correct me there if I'm wrong. But I have to say, I think those grants have been fairly few and far between from what I understand. So, yeah, I'm hopefully they'll get rolled out across the rest of the UK as well. This ability to tap into those, as you said, Tom, that can appear quite expensive, but actually there's a huge potential in if we can really get into them. So, yeah, collars have got a big place to play going forward, I think. Anything from anyone else in terms of livestock there, Kyle? Sorry, I've just interrupted you.
That's all right. I'll just say the one thing that, a lot of our colleagues and we talk about in our weekly meetings is we don't want to let any technology, but specifically collars, take the place of observation. We talked about observation a lot earlier on the arable side, but it's just as important on the livestock side. We don't want to implement the collars just so we can watch TV on the couch more often, right? And we lose that time observing and being with our livestock and seeing the impact of the graze and all the other observations we make. So yeah, and it's with any technology. We don't want that to replace our observation and the kit above our shoulders, as Tom said. And then the second thing I was thinking was, Stu, something we often hear is, people, when we talk about water infrastructure and fencing, they want to go right to the permanence. And so, something that Gabe taught me early and showed me early is avoid the high capital investments in terms of fencing and water until you absolutely know that that's where you want to put them. So in the early years of implementing these things, go be mobile, be able to get the temporary fencing, get the pipe on top of the surface, not, a big capital expenditure to put the pipe in the ground unless you're absolutely 100% certain. So those are the two thoughts that I've had so far from the livestock.
Yeah, good, Kyle. Thanks for that. I think I think you're right. It's important that we don't underestimate those observations and actually being out in the field as well. So yeah, I think they've got a big part to play in a lot of farms, but yeah, definitely being in the field is the key point altogether there. Tom, I think you've got your hand up. Have you got something to say on that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Carl. The flexibility thing. One of the things that we've been noticing and managing is that as we've been going through this model and following a sort of regenerative mindset and shaping it, the ground is actually changing and the system is changing. So we're actually it's almost a self-driven change. As it becomes more functional, we're starting to use it, and partly we're learning better how to use it, and so we're having to change our system all the time. So I'm thinking this flexibility of infrastructure is increasingly important for us because what we're doing on the ground is actually affecting change, and I think that I wasn't expecting that. And I think now it needs to be really hard planned into the system.
Yeah, I agree with that as well, Tom. Thanks for that. I've got one more topic that I want to bring up just in case anyone, I think we've got a minute or two here. Unless there's anyone got any burning questions they want to do, now's the time. But I have got one more topic in terms of we see the increasing role that trees are playing on farm. They have a huge part to play, obviously, and the benefits of them. I'm not going to go into all that. I think we'll all be we could talk for hours about it, but the benefits of them are being widely accepted now. What I want to sort of talk about is how do we get those trees in the field there without the livestock eating them completely or smashing them all to bits. And I know I'm leaning towards you here, Tom, because I've been at your place and I've seen what you're using, and I use the same ones at mine. But I just thought it might be a good idea for you to talk a little bit about those trees and how we protect them out there.
Yeah, interesting. I'm loving it. We're using. I think a lot of people will be using cactus guards. We've done we're now about five years in. We started off with some trial projects because they seemed a little bit too good to be true, and up until recently nothing had ever survived contact with a cow, but actually I think they've been pretty good. The JCB has had more of an impact on them than the cattle have, and I don't think you can blame the cactus guard for that. But we're using them for agroforestry infield trees, if that makes sense, to try and we're planting wood meadows and some of our more exposed old ground, old grass, to try and just create a microclimate. And it's been looks pretty successful so far. We're really pleased with it. We're finding actually even before the trees have grown, the cactus guards themselves appear to be creating a little bit of friction at ground level. We're also configuring the cactus guards so that you can use them as carriers for electric fences, by just having them offset, so that you can put either cable ties or I've got some. I'm rather embarrassed to say I'm buying little plastic carabiners from China, which are actually really irritatingly good. And you can just clip the electric fence onto them. And it just keeps the electric fence off the actual cactus guard. Although the cattle, because they get the ping from the electric fence, they don't necessarily seem to distinguish. But no, really powerful. The other thing that I think that we're trialing at the moment is, in addition to planting the trees in the cactus guards, planting quite a lot of other stuff, including things like brambles, which grow very quickly up the guard and give you a very quick microclimate. And indeed, the cattle can eat them, and the sheep certainly eat them. So really powerful. Still learning flat out. Doing things like we're trying half height cactus guards, which we're growing willows in. So it protects the base, the actual growing point of the willow, but allows the livestock to effectively browse it and prune it. Because a lot of the work we've been doing on willows with respect to livestock suggests that they need to have access to it all the time for it to be effective. So at the moment, there's a lot of trialing going on, but it's looking pretty promising.
Thank you, Tom. That's really good. That was kind of what I was hoping you'd say there. And I think those cactus guards have got a massive part to play for those guys who want to be involved in the tree planting side of things. We literally have about a minute or two left here. Does anyone have any sort of final thoughts on all of this? I know that this has been a quiet section for you here, Reese. I just wondered if you maybe had something else to throw in, because sorry, the livestock side of things has ostracized you a little bit there.
No, that's fine. It's all very interesting. I'm rather jealous. I think hopefully cows are somewhere in our future. I think more pasture and perennials is something we need to build into our system, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Verity, any closing words of wisdom?
Like Tom touched on that earlier, really, the most important tool is what's between your shoulders for decisions, and remember to ask. There's loads of people with so much information around. Go find a friendly person. If you dig, you'll find enough of them who are on the same wavelength with some positivity and encouragement. Don't try and treat symptoms. Find the cause of things and sort that out, rather than sticking plasters on, as opposed to actually getting to what the cause of the problem is. And again, a lot of that's through observation and asking. Ask any questions, ask anything.
No such thing as a stupid question.
No, I'm sure I've asked a few though in my life.
Yeah.
Well,
excellent. Kyle, do you want to send us out?
I would be happy to. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Thank you very much for our 3 guests tonight. You guys have provided a lot of great information that I know everyone listening will really appreciate. So thanks again. Thanks for the audience for joining. And just as a reminder, thank you to our sponsor of the podcast, which is Regenerate Outcomes. So if anybody's interested in working with us and getting us out on your farm, you can contact Regenerate Outcomes. I think Leah has Yep, she posted a link to the Regenerate Outcomes Handbook in the chat, so have a look at that if you'd like. And then our next event is coming up on the 11th of February, and it's entitled "Is No-Till Enough? Rethinking Soil Health on Arable Farms," and that will be a good extension of the discussion we've had tonight. So, I want to thank everybody again. Have a good night and take care. All the best.